Welcome to the Schuby Show, where sports, movies, TV shows, technology, history, and more come to life. Now, please be seated and get ready for some more never-ending nonsense with yours truly, Schuby.
This is the Schuby Show with yours truly, Carson Schubert, and today on the show we are going to try and get away from some sports talk for the most part. Gotta have some Cubs talk in with the guy I'm bringing in here today, and that is Ben Docker, or Mr. Docker as I still call him, as he was my history / social studies / econ / all the fun stuff for me in school anyway. Teacher at Central Lyon High School in Rock Rapids, Iowa. And he's also the head baseball coach for the Central Lyon boys varsity team. And I believe, Mr. Docker, you also have a coaching position for, is it middle school basketball?
Yep, I got middle school boys and girls basketball.
Okay. And that's the extent of your coaching as of right now?
That is the extent of my coaching, yep.
All right. Well, good to have you on. I haven't had so much different variety of things going on so far other than sports, so it's good to hopefully throw some history in here today, and hopefully you can help me do that a little bit.
Well, I'll give it my best shot.
All right. So, again, thank you for joining the show today. And first of all, why don't you give us a little bit of taste of your experience and expertise with history, maybe where you went to college and what you all studied and that kind of thing.
Well, I went to school at St. Ambrose University in Davenport. I actually got a degree in psychology, but I ended up getting a teaching endorsement in both American and world history. And I've been teaching American history for 12 years here at Central Lyon. So I know American history from Reconstruction to present day pretty well since I've been teaching it for 12 years.
All right. And I have gotten to see more of that this year as I'm in college. Of course, I saw that when I studied history with you, but I also I did a course from 1877 to the present, and I also took a course, I think it was another 1700 sometime to 1877. So I've taken 2 history courses about the United States, and then I also have taken Western Civ, which I'm taking right now. So I'm taking that and kind of learning some about the European side of things and some of the other countries as well. Their perspective on things, but we're going to mainly talk about the United States history and kind of some dates that kind of popped up recently, Mr. Docker, as we talk about World War II. Obviously, D-Day is kind of one of the bigger events around this time of year, and I think, and we'll also talk here about Jackie Robinson, as Jackie Robinson Day happened in Major League Baseball. But what do you know about World War II as a whole? Do you kind of know a little bit more from the United States side, or do you feel like you've got a pretty good grasp on the whole thing from each different side?
Well, World War II is kind of what drew me to teaching history. My dad was a big World War II guy. We watched tons of World War II movies at my house, and he had lots of World War II literature, and we watched a lot of documentaries and stuff on it. So that's kind of where I got my love for history. And so I've read a lot. I've obviously watched a lot of television and movies on that time period. So I feel like I obviously have a pretty good grasp of things from a U.S. perspective since I teach that. But I'm also very fascinated by the Holocaust. And so I've spent a lot of time reading on what went on in Germany, with the rise of the Nazi Party, the rise of Adolf Hitler, and what ultimately led to that sort of environment to essentially systematically murder 11 million people. So when you talk about the Holocaust and kind of what allowed the Nazis to come apart, I feel like I have a pretty good grasp on the European side of things. This last summer, I actually had the opportunity to go to France, and I visited the Normandy beaches and other parts of northern France. So that was pretty interesting. Learned a lot of stuff, and very fortunate to have that opportunity.
Yeah, that's pretty cool to kind of see that piece of history. And I've been not anywhere near extravagant history-wise as that, but I've been to different places involving World War II and that kind of thing. It's always interesting just to kind of be at that place. It's like, wow, these people there was actually a fight that happened here. This actually took place here, that kind of thing. It just kind of becomes so surreal when you finally get to see one of those historical places, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting to go to the Normandy beaches, I mean, you stand there and you look out into the English Channel and you just, try to envision what it would have looked like on that day, June 6, 1944, with just kind of looking from a German perspective, to look out there and just see the channel full of ships, and know that all that is coming at you. I mean, it just had to be mind-boggling to witness that. And then from our soldiers' perspective, taking on all the defenses and things that Hitler had in place there in northern France. I mean, it was just a monumental moment in history, what went on that day.
Yeah, that is for sure. One of the things I think also that it was in the last couple of weeks here in April. April's actually pretty well known, I think, for having a lot of things happen in it historically in the U.S. too. One of the things I think I also saw was the first patent was made in April. I can't even remember the date now, but it was, I think, April 10th, somewhere in between the 11th, 10th, somewhere in there. But it's kind of interesting just to look at all the different events that happened in April in the United States and beyond.
Yeah, April was a busy month, historically speaking.
As I'm trying to find where I actually had that at, but it was quite interesting to me too that one of the things that I mentioned to you is really would Hitler actually have happened if Germany wasn't kind of looking for power. It seemed like they were kind of power hungry heading into World War II after they didn't they wanted to become one of the top world powers. They were kind of rising, but they weren't in the top 5 of world powers. And they kind of wanted to have that taste of being a top country in the world. And that is, I think, why one of the main reasons. And a lot of people liked Adolf Hitler at that time because they thought that he had some good ideas, even though I think some people knew he was a little bit crazy. But I think a lot of people just kind of thought that he would be a good choice. And they didn't really even get to vote because he was elected or he was appointed chancellor, but after that, that was just the downfall right there.
Yeah, the dynamics that played out in the rise to power Hitler are pretty interesting. I actually think that Germany was more power hungry during World War I. They were looking to assert themselves as the dominant power in Europe. Obviously, it didn't work out for them. And then following World War I, Germany kind of adopted this us against the world mentality because with the Treaty of Versailles and the way the European powers plus the United States handled the rebuilding of Europe, the putting together of Europe after World War I, they solely blamed Germany for World War I. They made Germany pay a $33 billion reparation that they couldn't afford. And they pretty much told Germany, you lose. All right, you're going to suffer the brunt of all these consequences, and essentially, good luck.
Yeah.
And so the Germans, I mean, from the second that treaty was forced down their throat, they were angry, and they descended into a depression because economically, throughout World War I, their economy just deteriorated due to the British blockade. And so coming out of the war, unemployment sky high, bad economies bring out the worst in people. And so people were desperate, and Adolf Hitler was appealing enough to a large enough chunk of people in Germany to give him a chance. One thing people often don't understand is they kind of think the Nazi Party dominated Germany, which isn't true. The Nazi Party had about a third of the German population that claimed membership, but that was enough in the elections there in 1932 for the Nazi Party to obtain a majority of the seats in the German Reichstag, which is their parliament. And they struck a deal with the more conservative party in Germany, and with that coalition there between the Nazis and the conservative party, that then allowed for Adolf Hitler to become chancellor. So that was kind of the environment there that led to his rise, and the mistake really was made by that conservative element there, and that conservative party in Germany, thinking that, well, we can work with Hitler, we can work with the Nazis, we can't work with the more liberal party. And so they formed that coalition, and obviously from there, everything was downhill.
Yeah, and it really is interesting too to think about how the Germans kind of liked Hitler at first, and then they kind of really didn't know for sure every detail of what he was doing, but then they kind of knew something was going on, but they didn't really know for sure what was. And then, of course, finally, when the United States got involved on December 7th of 1941, when bombing of Pearl Harbor, of course, then you had then that was kind of when the United States really knew they could get involved, because, I mean, FDR wanted to get involved, but he really didn't think that the Americans at the time were really wanting to get involved, because they were just out of World War I, and they had their own problems they were kind of dealing with. They already were supporting some other countries, and it just didn't really make sense for the United States to get involved with another war unless they really had to, at least from the American people's perspective.
Yeah, a lot of Americans did not want into World War II. This whole sense of isolationism gripped our country coming out of World War I. A lot of people didn't even want to get involved in World War I. I mean, we were never directly attacked, like a Pearl Harbor that said, okay, we absolutely have to get involved in World War I. And so that it was debatable, whether or not we should even participate in that one. A lot of people thought we shouldn't have. And then it came out later after World War I that a lot of businesses made a ton of money off of the war. So some people saw it as just a war for the rich to get richer. And so ultimately ended up to where 70% of the country thought that World War I was a mistake. And so there was a tremendous amount of reluctance on the part of the American public, which then pressured Congress to avoid war at all costs. And so FDR, his hands were tied throughout a good chunk of the early part of World War II, from 1939 to 1941 there. And so it was going to take a direct attack like a Pearl Harbor to convince Americans that another European war required our participation.
Yeah. And then, of course, you can get into all the conspiracy theories of, Hitler was not actually in that bunker when it blew up, or because his body was never found. And then, of course, you can go down further along the line. Was it really the shot that killed JFK by Lee Harvey Oswald? And you can go back and probably even to Abraham Lincoln. I think there's a lot less controversy about that one. But, yeah. I mean, you've got so many conspiracy theories, probably, and from World War II, you probably can think of a bunch more that you could put in that category as well, where people are like, "Oh, is that really what happened?" I mean, you're always going to have that. And of course, I am one of those people that like speculative history to an extent, but when you start to have people questioning, did the Holocaust really happen? That's just pure ignorance right there.
Right. The whole debate on whether or not the Holocaust happened is just completely ludicrous. Yeah. I mean, there's so much documentation and evidence out there to prove its existence that It's unbelievable that there's a small segment of the population that ultimately thinks that it was a conspiracy made up by the Jews. So, yeah, there's definitely no shortage of conspiracies out there. The one that's around Hitler's death obviously gets talked about a lot. It's because there was never a body found, but most historians firmly believe that Hitler ultimately committed suicide in that bunker and had his bodyguards burn his body so that there was no evidence that the Soviets could find.
Yep, and then some of the other historical dates, Hitler's, I think, Auschwitz was one of the first concentration camps that was made or created, whatever you want to say, in early April here. And there was so many other things, like I said, with Jackie Robinson, the first U.S. patent. There was some other battles throughout different other wars that happened in April. So definitely a lot of things that have happened in April. And one of those things, as we transition to our next topics here, Martin Luther King Jr. was obviously a big figure in history for many different reasons, but he was one of the leaders of the Civil Rights Act. We'll talk a little bit about him and Jackie Robinson more in particular, but obviously April 11th, 1968, this was the week after he was assassinated. The Civil Rights Act of 1968 was finally signed and put into law by President Lyndon B. Johnson. We actually talked about this today. One of the many things we talked about with Lyndon Johnson and kind of the transition he went through from Kennedy and everything. But it finally was a big step in the right direction. Obviously, there was still going to be problems, but the law prohibited discrimination in housing, protected civil rights workers, and expanded the rights of Native Americans. So one of those things where we talked also about today, Mr. Docker, and I'm sure you can attest to this as well, Lyndon Johnson and JFK were pretty much the polar opposite.
Yeah, they didn't get along too well. And after JFK's assassination, the families really didn't see eye to eye on many issues. The pairing of JFK and Lyndon Johnson, I always use this as an example in government. That's a classic example of how presidents pick their vice presidents. Yeah. They don't pick their best friends. They don't pick people that might be the next best person to run the country if something will happen to them. They pick that person that's going to help them win. And Lyndon Johnson made up for every one of Kennedy's weaknesses. Kennedy was the youngest president ever elected. Johnson was a seasoned political veteran. Kennedy was Catholic. We'd never had a Catholic president before. Lyndon Johnson's a Protestant. Kennedy's from the Northeast, which a lot of the rest of the country didn't like New Englanders, and Johnson came from Texas. So Johnson offset every single one of Kennedy's weaknesses, which definitely helped Kennedy win. I mean, it was one of the closest elections in American history, and one of the swing states was Texas. That without Lyndon Johnson, probably doesn't go Kennedy's way. So, they were not good friends. They didn't get along all that well. I think a little bit of it was jealousy. The fact that here you have this 43-year-old who Johnson probably considered kind of a young punk, didn't really know what was going on, and he's president while Johnson has to take a back seat to him. Yeah,
and that's also one of the conspiracies too. Is Lyndon B. Johnson? He was also in Dallas the day that JFK was murdered, and people are wondering, what was he doing there, or did he have a part to play in this? It's like, oh man, I don't know if he would go that far. Especially since it was kind of that far into his presidency. I mean, I could understand maybe like a year or less into his presidency, but I don't know if he'd wait that long to make a move on killing Kennedy.
Yeah, the likelihood of him being a part of that is slim. But one thing that's also out there about Lyndon Johnson is that Kennedy in 1963 was talking to his advisors about pulling out of Vietnam. We weren't fully involved in Vietnam yet in 63, but things were starting to deteriorate there, and Kennedy had contemplated with his his cabinet and his closest advisors that we might be better off by just washing our hands of Vietnam. And the rumor, the conspiracy out there was that Lyndon Johnson was, had a lot of friends in the Pentagon, Department of Defense, military leaders, plus defense contractors that wanted a war in Vietnam because they stood to benefit financially from a war there. And so when Kennedy started to talk about maybe no Vietnam War for us, that maybe that kind of got something going with a potential assassination. But again, all conspiracy. There's no evidence to support Johnson doing any of that stuff. I mean, that's just something else that's floated out there.
Yeah, if you really want to have a good series, though, there's a lot of swearing in it. But in today's culture, I don't think too many people mind that anymore. But 11/22/63 was a Hulu Plus series. It is based on the book by Stephen King, and I believe there's another author in there as well. But it's a really good series on what if JFK's assassination had been prevented, and it goes in. There's I think somewhere between 4 and 8 episodes. I can't even remember, but it's a very good series. I don't even know if it's on Hulu anymore, but it's very interesting to think about, and the outcome is not quite what you would think it would be. It's not as maybe you'd think all things would be really good, but then you got to take into consideration that, did Lyndon B. Johnson end up being president at all after that? And the thing is, Lyndon B. Johnson, even though he was really, really wanting to spend the government's money, which maybe eventually led to the 70s, where you had that switch to kind of conservatism. It seemed to me that that Kennedy would have not done as many of these policy changes, like all these different programs that Johnson brought in were huge for the country. Whether you're conservative or liberal, you got to admit those programs are huge.
Yeah, it was a good question whether or not those things would have happened. I think as far as the civil rights stuff is concerned, Kennedy had already proven that he was a supporter of civil rights, so I think that those things probably still happen. But yeah, as far as like Medicare, Medicaid, Kennedy had actually talked about that stuff when he campaigned. But does he have enough ability to get those things implemented? That's a good question. I don't know. Obviously, Medicare is extremely popular today. But yeah, Johnson's Great Society programs, that's obviously what he's, the most positive attributes for his presidency were what he did with the Great Society. But yeah, interesting question. Do we get those things if Kennedy gets a chance to serve a second term?
And I think whether or not he was really forward a lot of doing a lot of things with programs, like he really wasn't that kind of guy. I mean, he was big with helping NASA and that kind of thing, but other than that, he didn't seem to take a whole lot of initiative on some of those other things. Like, he supported civil rights, but I don't know if he really was up for trying to make a law for it. And seemed like Lyndon Johnson, he just kind of wanted to get everything rolling. He was very active, and I don't know if Kennedy would have been nearly as active as on a second term. But again, it's very, very speculative history, of course. But it's always fun to think about, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, that was actually Kennedy's idea.
Okay.
Congress simply didn't work fast enough for Kennedy to be able to sign that law, but Johnson ultimately finished the job with that. So, I mean, me personally, my opinion is that Kennedy probably gets the Voting Rights Act in place, and Kennedy probably goes ahead with the Civil Rights Act of 1968. But again, we're speculating here. That's just personal opinion based on what I know of Kennedy.
Yeah, and actually, I was a really big fan of Kennedy. I think he was good with, especially younger generation. He's one of my favorite presidents, just because I think he did some good things. I mean, maybe he's a little overrated in the sense that maybe he didn't do as many good things as people have thought, just because he seems to be such a nice guy. But I feel like he was a really, really solid president and really helped some of the things that we have today, I think, especially the space program.
Yeah, he remains a popular guy. You can debate on how effective he actually was, when you look at his record and what he actually got implemented. But I think the fact that he was young, he was very charismatic. His family, was young and adored by the American public with his two young kids. And so that whole sort of environment there just kind of drew people in. People wanted to know what the president was doing. People wanted to know about his family. And so he was popular because of those sort of things. Historians have debated obviously a lot about, as far as policy and what things he actually did for the country and on how meaningful and effective those things actually were. But yeah, you ask people, to name presidents, Kennedy's always going to be one of the first ones out of the mouth. So he remains popular still today.
Yep. Moving on here. So obviously Martin Luther King Jr. was a big part of the kind of getting the civil rights activists to kind of come out of their shells a little bit and be more outspoken. But Jackie Robinson was also one of those guys. He obviously went through a lot to even get to be on the Dodgers organization. And I don't know if you've seen the movie 42. Obviously, it's very good if you have not seen it. But it is one of those movies that just makes you really think, or really question, how are we so mean to these people? These people that just because basically of their skin color, that we think that we can make fun of them, or we think that we can call them names and we can treat them terribly. It just blows my mind. And Jackie Robinson dealt with that firsthand, as you can see from the movie 42. But how big do you think that Jackie Robinson maybe had a bigger impact among African Americans than what Martin Luther King Jr. did?
I don't think he had a bigger impact. I think Jackie Robinson was instrumental in getting the movement off and running. The civil rights movement really began in World War II due to changes in the military, due to changes in defense industry jobs, which now became more inclusive. So, I mean, that kind of built the foundation, and then from there, everything was additive. So Jackie Robinson breaking that color barrier in 1947 was just another stepping stone, moving towards equality. And Jackie Robinson, and I'm sure he wasn't the best African-American basketball or baseball player at the time. I mean, there were other guys in the Negro Leagues that were far better. But Jackie Robinson had the right temperament, and they talk about that in the movie 42, where Jackie Robinson was an individual that could withstand every awful thing that was going to come his way. And I think that movie was really nice as far as portraying some of the negative things that Jackie had to deal with, because in reality things were far worse than what they showed in that movie. But ultimately Jackie Robinson had the character, he had the temperament, much like Martin Luther King Jr. He could simply turn the other cheek, didn't fight back, was nonviolent, didn't, for the most part, visibly let people know that they were getting to him. And it's because of that he was the right choice to do that. And because he effectively did it, I mean, not only did he prove that he could deal with all the other stuff that went on outside of playing baseball, but then also be a darn good baseball player. Yeah. That was a huge, huge accomplishment. And a huge leap forward for African Americans in the late 1940s.
Yeah. Career stats here for Jackie Robinson. 311 hitter, 1,500 hits. Maybe doesn't sound all that good considering there's people with 4,000 hits in their career. But, I mean, considering back then and everything he went through, 137 home runs for a guy that you wouldn't think hits a whole lot of home runs, 734 RBIs, and he was a good fielder too, and he obviously was one of the best base stealers in baseball at the time. He won the two times in 1947 and 1949, stolen base leader, batting champion in 1949, rookie of the year in 1947, and the MVP of the National League in 1949, and of course helping the Dodgers win their 1955 World Series, six-time All-Star from 49 to 54. So, I mean, you maybe look at the hits and the home runs and other things and maybe not say so much, but just on the bases and considering his batting average, and I'm sure if you look at some other stats and things, it's just inconceivable that this guy was a fantastic player and obviously a great role model for not just African Americans, but everybody. I mean, I love watching 42 just to see some of the things, and I haven't really looked at old Dodgers film, but if I could try and find some film on Jackie Robinson, I think it would be a lot of fun to just watch him steal home. Was one of the things that he did in the movie, and he did that quite a few times, I think, or he at least tried to, as he was sneaky on the bases.
Yeah, definitely the base running is probably what he's best known for. That statue they just put outside Dodger Stadium with him sliding into home. Mm-hmm. That was kind of his iconic moment. But with Jackie Robinson, you mentioned all the stats, which a lot of them are pretty solid. But I think with Jackie Robinson, the biggest factor with him is that you have to also consider what he dealt with off the field, and even on it to some extent, with the derogatory comments and people intentionally throwing at him and trying to hurt him. And I mean, to perform at the level he did with that sort of environment is just amazing. Yeah.
Absolutely. And he was inducted into the Hall of Fame, Baseball Hall of Fame, in 1962. And I actually got to go to the Negro Leagues Museum in Kansas City a couple of years ago, and that was a very interesting experience. They've got kind of a made-up field in there as well. It's kind of like all flooring that's all looking like a field. It's not like actual turf in there or anything, but it's pretty cool. And just going through some of the names that were big, obviously Satchel Paige and some of those other guys just were in these other minor leagues. And as I mentioned in 42, they were thinking about bringing Satchel Paige up, or somebody mentioned Satchel Paige, and he said, no, he's old. He's 31, but he was still a pretty good baseball player.
Yeah, Satchel Paige was definitely a good ball player. I think he made his major league debut at 42.
Yeah.
So he did eventually get a chance, but again, that was the thing they were looking for is the right fit. Combination of age, temperament, ability. Josh Gibson is the one I think of, who there's no official records, but some say he had 800 plus home runs during his career in the Negro Leagues. And just a phenomenal hitter. He's referred to as the African-American Babe Ruth. But a lot of people question his temperament on whether or not he could withstand all the things Jackie Robinson had to endure. So that's kind of why he took the back seat to Jackie Robinson.
Yeah. So before we finish off with the Cubs and baseball here, let's talk a little bit about the not so great current situation that we are dealing with right now in the U.S., but I mean it could be a lot worse. But it's kind of one of those things where maybe we need to look at history, Mr. Docker, and kind of have that explain to us what we should do here. Kind of let that be the leading instrument in telling us what we need to do as a country. Because if you look at what we did with Syria here, and whether or not we should have gotten involved with that or not, now you get Russia involved. We were kind of friends with them, and now all of a sudden you're not as much anymore. it's kind of like one of those things where do you want to get involved? Like if you go all the way back to Hitler, as we talked about earlier, there was a lot of millions and millions of Jews and gypsies and homosexuals and everything being killed. Was Syria trying to do that same thing? Were they trying to kill their own people? Was it going to end up being another situation? Obviously, probably not to the extent of Hitler, but is it going to be a situation where they kill tons of their people? I mean, there's kind of a mixed thought process on there. What do you think about that?
Well, Syria is a giant mess, and there is no easy solution. There's never been an easy solution to any problem in the Middle East. But for 6 years now, that civil war in Syria has been going on, and Bashir al-Assad, the dictator of Syria, he's been killing his own people for 6 years now. It's sad, it's unfortunate, but again, because of the alliances he has with Russia and with Iran, it really complicates things for us. If we do things militarily, do we then set off a war or a conflict that now includes Iran and Russia? So essentially we start World War III. Obviously ISIS and operating out of parts of Syria is a significant issue for us. And then ultimately, if we take out Assad, who do we replace him with? I mean, who ultimately fills the void? Is it someone worse? Right? I mean, I don't have the answers. If I did have the answers, I'd probably be more important in doing other things than teaching American history. But
you might be in the Oval Office.
I don't know about that. I don't know if I'd want to, but it is definitely a complicated issue. There's so many challenging issues in the world today that people that have to make the decisions. There's no easy solution.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there's a certain component of history that can help us prepare for a situation like with Syria, or a situation in the future, like if we eventually have to start paying off some of our debt? Is there a situation from history that can kind of help certain situations like that?
Well, I think with Syria, probably the recent Iraq War is the best thing for us to look at. I mean, the Iraq War, one of the main priorities was regime change there. Let's get rid of Saddam Hussein. I mean, brutal dictator, just like Bashir al-Assad. And we would replace it with a democracy. Well, obviously you can debate on the effectiveness of that. I mean, Iraq has significant issues today. I mean, ISIS has controlled part of northern Iraq because there's not a stable government. There's not a stable security force there. So any sort of regime change, I hope by now, by looking back at what happened in Iraq, we understand that it's not easy. And I hope that if, whatever course of action we take, we try to think about potential consequences, what's going to happen 5 years after or 10 years down the road, and try to plan, because I don't think we did a very good job of planning with Iraq. And so hopefully that can be at least a learning example for how we potentially deal with Syria. Yeah. Ultimately we hope that our elected leaders are good history students. I mean, we study history so we don't repeat past mistakes.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that doesn't always happen, though.
No, that's very true. One of the things I kind of thought of when you're saying that is it's kind of like when you're drafting a player. You're not necessarily always looking to get the player that you think is the best or the player that fills a need, but kind of like with the Vikings, last year they drafted Mackenzie Alexander. So far hasn't been very good, but they drafted him with the future in mind, because they knew that there was a good chance that Captain Munnerlyn would go to Carolina, or he would leave the Vikings in free agency. So it's one of those things where you got to prepare for the future, no matter, and you can't be shocked by every little thing that happens either. You've got to kind of look at history, and you got to look at different things that are going on. And I mean, obviously, there's going to be things that you're not going to be prepared for, but I think there are certain things where you can definitely be prepared for more than others.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just making a decision for today or for tomorrow. You're also making decisions for, what happens 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And again, none of us have a crystal ball. None of us can see that far into the future. So it's what makes those decisions really hard.
Yep. All right, so that's going to do it for history talk, and now we get into baseball talk. And Mr. Docker, the Cubs obviously coming off their first championship in 108 years. I'll just remind you of that. But obviously it's been 20 plus years now for the Twins. So I think it's 30 actually, or 30 since their first, and then 26 since their last. So, but yeah,
they're on the current path to 108, Carson.
I hope not. That would be a long wait. At least I've made it through 26 years, even though I've only been alive for 20. But what are your thoughts on the baseball season so far? Obviously, very early. It's hard to tell really anything. What are your thoughts on the season so far and the Cubs?
Well, I've just spent most of my baseball watching the Cubs. I think the baseball season is a marathon. It's 162 games, and to really get any sort of opinion after the first 10 to 15 games you're not going to know much. But I'm just like everybody else. I mean, I watch the Cubs and their bullpen scares me to death. I see significant issues there, and maybe it works out. They've got some of the guys back from last year that have struggled thus far. Maybe they revert back to last year, once they kind of get settled in. But I think the Cubs have some bullpen issues, and I fully expect come trade deadline they'll acquire an arm or two, and they've got tons of resources in the minor leagues to go out and do it. So in the long run, I think they're going to be fine. They're kind of off to a slow start, but you come off your first championship in 108 years. That's probably to be expected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't know if the Cubs will be able to repeat, because obviously one thing that's really hard to do, but maybe they can start something that the San Francisco Giants started, where they won 3 championships in like 5 years or something. Maybe they can do something like that. Because it is, especially I think in baseball, where it seems like if you even get into the playoffs, you've got a chance to win in baseball. I mean, obviously you can say that about other sports too, but it seems like that more in baseball, because you can have off nights, you can have things that don't go your way, one little detail that doesn't go your way, and things can change drastically in baseball. So that's one of those things, like with when you have teams that go on miracle runs and win. I mean, the Royals obviously made it the year before that, and they were really close to winning that. If you have a minor detail or two, you take that out, and the Royals probably are back-to-back World Series champions against the Mets, and then of course in the year that they won it. So I don't know. I just feel like baseball, more than any sport, is about the details and about the minor things that you really don't think about in maybe football or even basketball.
Yeah, baseball postseason's a total crapshoot. I really don't like the baseball postseason because it's not like the regular season. I mean, the regular season is determined by who has the best 25 players on their team. I mean, you've got to use 5 starting pitchers. You've got to use all 7 to 8 guys in your bullpen. You've got to use every guy on your bench. But you get to the postseason, then, I mean, if you've got 2 dominant starters, that's all you need. I mean, they're going to win you 4 games. All right, so that 5-man rotation that you needed to use throughout the year is out the window. Mm-hmm. I mean, your 4 and 5 starters might be good than everybody else's, but if your top 1 or 2 aren't as good as the team you're playing, you're probably not winning. Yeah. And then baseball's so streaky, where if you get a guy or 2 in your lineup that gets hot in the postseason, they can carry you. So I really don't like baseball postseason for the simple fact that it goes against what you have to do to be the best team during the regular season.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
that's frustrating, Kai.
Yeah, it's weird, though, too, with baseball. Like, you can have guys that you would not expect at all to have a good postseason. Like, I think it was Daniel Murphy who had a great postseason either last year or the year prior. And then I think when the Royals won the World Series or the year before that, Raul Ibanez, he had a great postseason for the Royals. And it's just like, oh, man, if you get that one player, like you said, you can be carried all the way, it seems like. And the Cubs kind of had that with their whole team, it seemed like. Last year they had guys that could carry the team, multiple guys in the lineup, obviously, multiple guys in the rotation, but maybe not as much in the bullpen this year for the Cubs. But, yeah, it is very interesting how the baseball postseason works out. And that's why I actually enjoy baseball's postseason more than a lot of other sports, just because you really don't know what can happen. I mean, you can probably make predictions, and a lot of times they'll be right, but there will be those teams that surprise you by a lot.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, you go back and look at all the wild card teams that have won World Series. I mean, you compare that to like the NBA. I mean, how many 7 or 8 seeds win NBA championships? None of them.
Yeah.
I mean, how many of them even get out of the first round? Hardly any.
No.
Same thing for NFL. I mean, there occasionally get a wild card team that gets hot and makes it to the Super Bowl. But
the Giants.
By and large, by and large, in those other sports, your top seeds are the ones that are going to win it. Baseball, that's not true. Anybody, once you get to the postseason, can win.
Yep. So before we wrap up, what do you think? Do you have a prediction for AL, NL champion, and just World Series prediction?
Oh, well, National League, I'm going to go with my Cubbies. I think over a 162-game marathon, they've got the best team in baseball. But a couple teams in the National League do scare me. I mean, the Mets pitching staff, I mean, they're lights out. So it's a team that could get there and challenge the Cubs. The Dodgers, really good. Again, they could potentially challenge. So the Cubs got their work cut out for them. American League, I don't follow the American League as much. I know the Twins aren't coming out of the Central, but I think the Yankees and the Red Sox are going to be tough. NL East is going to be tough, kind of as it typically is. And I think Houston's got a good chance, Texas potentially. And I think the Indians are going to right the ship before the year's over, and they'll be a power to deal with. So World Series-wise, I'll go Cubs. Cubs, Red Sox, and I'll take the Cubs in 6.
Okay. Yeah, you're not going to have another NBA back-to-back championships the same in baseball. Probably not.
No, it's tough to do.
Yeah. And it's really interesting just to think about. For me, I am going to not pick my Twins because I will regret that eventually. I think the Yankees are kind of on a miracle, not necessarily a miracle, but they're really on a great stretch right now of baseball that they're probably not going to keep up on. I feel like they're too young. They're still kind of rebuilding. I would probably take Boston in that division. Toronto has been off to a terrible start. They haven't been hitting the ball well, which is surprising. They'll probably start hitting again soon, but my goodness, they're 3-11 to start the year. That's, I believe, the worst team in baseball right now. Yes, they are. That is one thing that's shocked me, even with their pitching. Their pitching even hasn't been that bad, but it's been the hitting of all things, which you would not expect at all from the Blue Jays. I'm going to say the Indians are going to probably get back to the World Series, and I think they're going to be possibly like the Royals. They're gonna almost have it in one year, and I think they're gonna win it this year, possibly. I'll just say that's my prediction for now. Obviously, it's probably going to change eventually, but and then I'm going to say the Nationals. I think that the Nationals really have what it takes this year. I think they've got the obviously Bryce Harper, the guy that can hit. And I feel like their pitching rotation is also really good, and I think their hitting is going to be better than the Mets in that division. So I'm going to say the Nationals and the Indians in the World Series. That's my prediction.
I agree with the Indians. Nationals got some bullpen issues they got to figure out.
Yeah, maybe they'll make a move at the trade deadline. We'll see.
Yeah, I think they'll need to.
Yeah, so... All right, I think that's going to do it. We're all over time again. It seems like I've been going over time on all my podcasts all the time, but that is what happens when you're having fun, I guess. We're having a lot of fun talking about history and talking about sports, of course. Any other closing thoughts from you, Mr. Docker?
No, I appreciate the opportunity to be on the most popular podcast in Northwest Iowa.
That doesn't take too much, I heard, but hopefully we continue growing. So
yeah, I'm sure your numbers are going to go through the roof after my guest appearance.
Well, hey, if you share the episode on Facebook, maybe we'll really get some really good views. Hopefully, so.
All right, I'll get some publicity out there for you.
All right, perfect. We appreciate it. So again, thank you, Mr. Docker. He's a history, social studies teacher, Central Lyon High School, and also the head baseball coach and girls and boys middle school basketball coach. So again, Mr. Docker, thanks for joining the Schuby Show this week, and we'll probably have to have you on again sometime, especially if there's some big historical event or something like that come up.
Well, hopefully a Central Lyon State baseball appearance too. We can do a state tournament preparation show. Hopefully. Yeah,
that would be great. Yeah, we'd talk about that a little bit, and that'd be a lot of fun. And of course, if the Cubs end up being in the World Series, then we'll for sure probably have to have you on.
Oh, of course.
All right, well, knock on wood for that one, I guess.
Yeah, no kidding.
So, all right, again, thank you for joining us, and you have a good night.
All right, thank you.
You bet. All right, that is going to do it for the Schuby Show today. I believe we'll come back with another episode later this week, but if we do not, we will see you next week. For Schuby and Mr. Docker, we will take a break and hopefully resume sometime later this week. If not, again, as I said, next week we'll be back, as this is another full episode for you guys. Again, don't forget, follow the show on Twitter, find us on Facebook, Instagram, and you can email the show, theschubyshow@gmail.com. Again, thanks for joining us. Skol.
Thanks for listening to The Schuby Show. We hope you mildly enjoyed yourself with more never-ending nonsense with yours truly. For more nonsense, go to the website, theschubyshow.webs.com. Get the show on iTunes, Google Play, YouTube, Stitcher, and TuneIn Radio. Until next time, Skol.